Hi, it's Maddie, and I'll be showing you the basics of bookbinding. So if you haven't heard of bookbinding, it is basically just the skill that allows you to sew together a book. It's hand stitching, and this could be anywhere from a hardback novel or just a journal that you write in, that type of thing. So to bind a book together means just to sew the pages together so that they stay in order and they don't fall out. So if you want to start a project with bookbinding, you'll need a few things. You usually have these around the house, either that or you can get them pretty much anywhere. So you definitely need a needle and thread. So I use pretty big needles. As you can see, they're about the size of my pinky, I would say. They're a lot heavier of a needle. They're more substantial in your hand. I will say that because they're larger, there's less of a chance of pricking yourself with one of these. But on the same token, they're bigger, so if you do chance to prick yourself, it will hurt more than a standard sewing needle. So if you're used to a sewing needle, you might want to try using a thimble to start out, or just be really careful using the larger needle. So you use one of those, and then I like to use what's known as embroidery floss. This comes in little skeins like that. They're pretty inexpensive. I think these are about, well, these I got at a garage sale, but ones new, like at Walmart or so, are about 50 cents. So I'm going to use just standard black thread. So each strand, so this strand of embroidery floss is actually made up of 6 individual strands of sewing thread. So it's really just really thick thread. That's all it is. You'll also need scissors, and you'll need paper. You can also, if you want to cover your notebook, that could be a whole other video, but if you want to cover your notebook, you'll need either like a cardboard, you can use a vinyl if you want to make like a sort of leatherette cover, or you can just use a repurposed old book cover, like if one of your books has fallen apart for some reason. You can use an old, like I have a book cover here that the pages came out of it. So like you can, since this just already has the reinforced covers and the spine, once you sew together all of the pages of the book that you were going to put together, then you would just glue them into the inside of the spine and repurpose your book cover. And it might be that there's just an old book that has a really nice cover and all the pages are deteriorating, so you want to save the cover. You can do that. So I have, as an example, just regular old lined paper. The problem with lined paper, though, is if you want to have a standard size notebook, like 8.5 by 5.5 or something like that, you'd end up folding the paper like this way, and your lines, therefore, when you're sewing, would be like this instead of like that. They would be vertical instead of horizontal, which is annoying. So usually for lined paper, unless I buy special paper that's designed that way, like larger paper, I just have taken a regular lined sheet of notebook paper and I've cut it in half. So it's going to make a mini notebook. So this is where the half would be. This is the top half. Now you take each individual piece of paper and you're going to fold it in half. So like I did with this one. And then you're going to take 5 or 6 sheets, depending on how thick the paper is. The thicker the paper, the fewer pages you want to put together. So you're not going to just, a lot of people think that when you sew a book, you take, let's say there's 100 pages in the book. You're not going to sew all of those 100 pages together in the same stitch. You're going to separate the pages into sections so that there's smaller sections. You might have noticed in a book, there's smaller sections of a book that are sewn together, and then all of them are sewn together after that. And that's what we're doing. So you'll take about 5 or 6 pages. And remember, if you have one sheet of paper and you fold it in half, how many pages is it? It's 4 pages, because you have this one, this one, this one, and then the back. So out of just one sheet of paper, you're actually getting 4 pages in your notebook, which is kind of cool. So you take, here, let me adjust the camera. You take your one sheet of paper, you open it up, and then you want to take another one that you've folded in half and place it inside. So you don't want to just stack them on top of each other. You want to fold them like within each other so that they'll be like a book, like a little folio. And like I've done with the rest of them, I've taken all of them and folded them inside each other. To make what's known as a signature. So all a signature means, let me move it back up so you can see my face. So all it means by signature, or all I mean by signature, is that it is just one section that you're going to sew together. So once you have a signature completed, you can move on and make a few more. I like to make all of mine before I start sewing. That way they're already put together. Otherwise, you're like in the zone of sewing and then you have to stop, put all your stuff down, go get paper, make a new signature, and then sew it. So it's better to just have all of it done to begin with. So I have 5 signatures here. I decided to be kind of quirky with the middle signature, and on the outside of it, I added a strip of scrapbooking paper that I had, and that just adds a little pizzazz. It means it'll have your notebook will have one colored page in the middle of it, and that's kind of fun. I don't know. I like to be kind of zany when I make these. They make great gifts, by the way. I like making notebooks for people. It's really fun. So once you put the signatures together, this is what it looks like. So you have all of your layers of your like small books that come together to make one book. So once you have that, you're going to want to pre-drill. You're not really drilling, you're poking, but you want to like pre-poke your holes for where you're going to sew. So typically, I like to open up the notebook, mini notebook, and see on the inside. I like using lined paper also because you can tell like kind of the distance between holes. If you want to put your holes, say, a ½ inch apart or an inch apart, you can kind of tell because of the lines. So I take my needle. You can also use anything with a really sharp edge. I have an awl. So if you've ever used an awl, this also has a really, really sharp edge. You don't need an awl though. I just use my needle. So there it is. So I'll just start, and you make sure all the pages are lined up so that the hole, when you poke through, it's going to go through all of the pages at the same time. So I just start like right up here and I poke a hole. So all I've done is I've poked a hole, it's come out the other side, and then when I pull it out, there is a hole. I don't know if you can see it right there. There's a hole already in my little spine of this booklet that I've made. So that's going to be one stitch, and then I'm going to move down, and I think I'm going to go to this top line, and I'll poke through. This is another advantage of using a thick needle, because your thick needle will more easily like move through the paper. I talk to people a lot about sewing versus embroidering versus bookbinding, and I have friends who sew and bookbind, and it's funny because they talk about how a sewing needle is a lot thinner and more flexible because fabric, of course, can move. It stretches like with your needle, but Paper, of course, is made out of wood and is not very flexible or pliable, so you need a stronger, firmer needle to poke through it. So I have my second hole poked in, and I'm going to go down, I think, like 4 lines and poke again. 4 more lines after that, poke again. And 4 more lines after that and poke one last time. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, or excuse me, holes in the booklet. So this will allow me to sew more easily when I am putting a thread in. So now it comes time to thread the needle. There we go. So you've got your embroidery floss, and you want to pull out a length of it. It's very easy to just refill the thread and just go from where you left off. This isn't like a really close stitch. I do a stitch that's known as a kettle stitch. Sorry, this is my coffee table. I do what's known as like a coffee. No, I just said coffee because this is the coffee table. Sorry. I do what's known as a kettle stitch or a Coptic stitch. That's sort of like where you connect all of the holes in the first signature, and then when you're at the end of the first, you would loop up and you connect the first booklet with the second booklet, and then as you're stitching the second one, you dip down into the previous stitch and you like sort of hook it into your top stitch. And I'll show you that as we move on, but that's a fun stitch to do. You can do all sorts of stitches, depending on what you like. You can experiment with it. As long as you get the pages to stay together, you're usually fine. So, I think I'll just do that much. And you have to remember, this is kind of obvious, but whenever you're measuring your thread, it's going to be half the length of whatever you measure because you're going to fold it in half when you're sewing. So I have quite a bit, but remember it's going to be folded in half, so really it's only going to be this long, which isn't as long. So here's my needle. These needles are a lot easier to thread than small ones, which I like. And as you noticed, I did not separate the strands of thread. In the floss, I'm using the full floss. I don't have to. The less thread you use, the less obvious the thread will be. So if I only used one strand of thread, you would have to look really carefully to like see where I had sewn, because the thread would go so closely into the seam of the book in the spine that you wouldn't notice it as much. But I don't think I'm going to put a cover on this notebook because I kind of like it just the way it is. So I'm going to have an exposed spine, which means that you'll be able to see my stitching on the spine of the book. And so I don't care as much if it's exposed anyway. I don't care as much about being able to see the threads. So once I've threaded the needle, I'm going to pull the needle down to the halfway mark. There we go. Pull it tight. And then we have the end with the 2 threads. And I'm going to tie it off into a knot. I like to tie it twice or even thrice because I don't like the knot popping through the stitch unexpectedly. You really only need to tie it maybe twice because this is really thick thread. And so see, that's just from one, and that's already a pretty large knot in the thread, but I'll do it again just for fun. Okay, there it is. And there's the needle. Okay, so let's see if we can get this to show up pretty well. So here's that signature that I started with before that has the, no it isn't, I'm lying. This is the one with the holes in it. Let me move all this stuff. Okay, so here is the signature or section that I started with that I already pre-poked all of the holes. So you want to start, you want to clack this down on your surface so that it is all neat and tidy. And you want to go on the inside of your book first so that the knot will be on the inside of the book rather than the outside of the book. It really doesn't matter. You could put it out on the outside, but I like to just put it on the inside. So I will stick the needle right in that first hole and then pull it out. So see, the knot is up against the top right there. And then on the outside, it looks like that. Now I go back in the second hole on the outside. So I go in, and I pull it through. And then it looks like that. And back again on the inside to the outside. Then again, it's very repetitive, but all stitching is. And back to the outside. Okay, so there's my first signature sewn together. And technically, this is like a miniature book all in itself because it is sewn together. I mean, the spine is intact and all of the pages are staying together. But you want to leave your last stitch where you left off. So I left off at the bottom of this one. So I'm going to take my next signature and I want to poke holes in it like I did before with this one. You can poke all of the holes beforehand. I just didn't because I was showing you one as an example. But I'll go ahead and do these now. And I'm remembering where I poked the other holes. That way they'll line up. Because I counted off on my lines to see where I was going to be. Okay, so that's done. So what you're going to do is let me get this lined up, sorry. You want to put your next signature on top of the other one. So the one on the bottom is the one that you already sewed. You want to lay the next one directly on top of it. And then you have the string coming out right here. You want to go right into this hole on the next signature. So you're just going to stitch directly up into the next one. Make sure you get all your pages open. So you're going to go through all of the holes. And you poke through there. So this is the last stitch on the second signature. So I pull it through. And see, this is the inside of the second booklet. And then I'll go back in the second stitch. And pull it tight. So now what I've done is I've sewn from the bottom one directly into the top one and then pulled it back out on the second one. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and around the bottom. So, I don't know if you can see this, but I had the thread coming out of the top booklet. I took the needle and I went down and up through the previous stitch. So I have the stitch down here that I'm going to anchor it into. So I pull this up. And see how that looped right into there? So that adds another layer of like connection to that other signature. And then from there, I'm going to go up into the next hole on the outside and go into the inside. And back outside. And then I'm going to repeat the process again. So I have the thread coming out of the top, and I'm going to go down below this one and sew through it. And pull it tight. And then go back through the last hole on the top of this next one. And now I'm at the top of the second signature. So when I fold this up, now I've sewn both of these together. So I don't know if you can see very well, but they sort of look like an X because I've just made a crisscross stitch connecting the two booklets together. So now instead of just having one booklet that you can open like a book, now you have two of them stitched together. So they'll all be together. Now in the middle, where you connected these two, there is a little bit of an opening because this is where your stitches are. But if you were to actually finish this off and glue the spine together and say put it in a book cover like this, what you do is the finished project would be glued directly into here. So you wouldn't be seeing the exposed binding I talked about earlier. In this project, if I decide to finish this one, if I just left it exposed like this, you would just see some crisscrosses on the edge and you would see the exposed thread, but that's the only difference really, is that either if you can leave it open or leave it shut. If you're just making a little booklet, like if I were to finish this, I might just use it as like a pad in my purse to have like a shopping list or something, because it is just a little handy dandy notebook. And you can just make these out of, there I am. You can just make these out of leftover lined paper, or like scratch pads, whatever you have around the house, as long as you've got some sewing thread and a needle. So that's the absolute basic tutorial of bookbinding. There are a lot more complicated versions, but the kettle stitch is pretty much the most basic of them all. So yeah, so I hope you guys try it. It's really fun. At least I think it's fun. It is kind of repetitive, but after a while, the more you finish, the more it looks like a book, and then you get excited because then when you're done, you can write in it. So I hope you guys enjoyed learning about bookbinding. Thanks.